What's up, guys? My name is Steven Guadagni with 5 Tool Sports Science right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We got a great video coming for you guys today. We're going to be talking about the ROI of energy flow analysis for pitching velocity. I'm actually very excited about this one. I'm trying to try to break down the best bang for your buck in terms of energy flow in the pitching delivery of what you guys need to be focusing on to actually move the needle for pitching velocity. Okay? Let's begin. All right, so energy flow overview. We're going to be talking about energy flow sequence here from the ground and our ground reaction forces to the hips, to the trunk, to the arm, to the ball. That's going to be the simplest explanation of how energy is flowing through the body. Okay, so each link either amplifies or it leaks energy. All right, so our goal is going to be to maximize energy transfer and reduce dissipation or energy links at each step. Okay. So phase one, we're going to be talking about the ground reaction force and initiation. So I've got a nice little video here showing our force plates and what's happening with the back leg's interaction with the ground, and then the force plate on the front leg, what's happening with the force that you're landing with. All right. So this is just going to be talking about it from the back leg here. All right. So what's going on the back foot? So it initiates the linear momentum through the back leg. All right. So the ROI in terms of pitching velocity, the rating is going to be a medium. Okay. The bottlenecks are going to be weak ground reaction force and poor direction and poor stride length. Okay. So the training focus, resisted sprints, plyometrics, and lower body strength and power development is going to significantly help you with this. And then there's going to be, of course, some biomechanical drills that you can do specifically around just teaching yourself the ability. This is kind of where the drift comes in of once you come to peak knee height and you shift your energy forward, setting your back leg up into the ground, okay? And then just learning how the ground reaction forces is going to help sequence and set up the first initial move of the pelvis, which we're going to talk about in the next phase. Now, this is where it's like some schools of thought can get a little bit different on this, where if you've been taught like a big push off the mound and drive leg phase, some massive ground reaction force here. There are pitchers that do that. We've talked about guys like Tim Lincecum. We've talked about guys like Spencer Strider, Shane McClanahan, all guys who have talked about in interviews where they talk about the drive off of the mound or their push off of the mound against the rubber. Now, if you put them on force plates, you might get some pretty high ground reaction forces from the drive, the initial linear momentum and propulsion off of it. What's been happening in pitching is guys who are really emphasizing in this, we see that they're throwing off the timing and sequencing of the pelvis by going into early extension of the leg. And then what happens is they're landing at front foot strike and the hips haven't rotated. They've just really pushed and extended off of the back leg. Some guys that can still maintain that angular rotation into front foot strike can do both. And Tim Lincecum, Strider, and McClanahan can all do both of those, but that requires a ton of coordination, that requires a ton of hip mobility and athleticism to be able to do that, not to mention the amount of force that hits the front leg to be able to stabilize the front leg from that position. Okay, so for that reason alone, I'm going to say the ground reaction and force initiation is just going to be a medium correlation to ball velocity. The legs generate the initial force, but contribute less to total power than the trunk, okay? Phase two, hip rotation and separation timing, okay? This role is to store elastic energy through hip to shoulder separation. The ROI on this rating is going to be high. Okay, the bottlenecks are going to be early and delayed hip rotation disrupts the kinetic flow. We've covered this at length in a lot of our videos. It's just the early trunk rotation. Okay, so if you're landing at front foot strike and your shoulders aren't closed, you're landing open, you're going to be leaking a ton of energy. If you're landing closed with your shoulders and you've created hip to shoulder separation, you're storing energy elastically through the obliques, through the trunk, through the core, okay, all the way up to the arm. It's creating this big stretch that can then snap the trunk through rotation, okay? So there's a high correlation to this move and pitching velocity, okay? In golf, they call it the X factor because if we draw a line through the hips and then through the shoulders, it creates an X, and this is the amount of separation you're getting. The magnitude of the separation or the amount of separation is going to be different from guy to guy. A lot of it is just about the timing of what's happening right into front foot strike. So your training focus needs to be delayed trunk rotation drills, resisted medicine ball rotations, disassociation drills, water bags, and throwing drills to put it all together. So proper timing enhances trunk angular velocity and total energy transfer. So let's just briefly run through this again. Okay, from leg lift, loading down the mound, getting into the back leg position, whatever linear propulsion that you've created. Then there's going to be the angular velocity of the pelvis, landing at front foot strike, still delayed and closed. You've maximized your hip to shoulder separation. But the timing of this is all what happens right into front foot strike. So you have to be able to time up your pelvis rotation, the trunk up landing, and the arm getting up and cocked to some degree right into front foot strike. That's the timing, the sequencing, the coordination. That's the hard part of this, okay? So proper timing enhances trunk angular velocity and total energy transfer. Next point. Okay, phase 3, trunk rotation and angular velocity. Okay, so this roll is the primary source of angular momentum and energy transfer. The ROI rating for this is very high. Early trunk rotation before foot contact, we just covered that, equals velocity loss and elbow stress. Trunk power is highly correlated with ball velocity. We've talked at length about a number of studies with this. We've talked about how devices like Proteus Motion that measure rotational power, we're finding more and more association to separation and ball velocity coming from the trunk rotational power. It is extremely highly correlated to ball velocity. In my opinion, it's probably the best bang for your buck in terms of your ROI, which we'll talk more about later on in the video as well. Okay, so the training focus needs to be med balls, water bags, flywheels, Proteus if you've got it, Kaiser machines, cables, core rotational power, and then timing your trunk firing. So again, just that sequencing of landing closed at foot contact to be able to sequence that energy more efficiently. The trunk contributes the majority of mechanical power in pitching, okay? Phase 4, lead leg block and deceleration, all right? So the role of this, transfer the linear and angular momentum to the trunk and the arm. The ROI rating for this is high. Weak leg stiffness and poor deceleration or delayed extension, okay? So let's briefly talk about this. We've covered this at length in a lot of videos as well. There's a big correlation to by the time you've passed all this energy, you've landed closed in separation. Your front leg is landing in some degree of flexion. Once you've gone from this flexion to extension, this is called lead knee extension velocity. That's going to be linked to ball velocity. But even guys who don't get that big extension velocity, just the deceleration, the stopping of the pelvis, just giving your the pelvis a firm, it's not drifting or leaking energy forward, it's just blocked and firmed. I've talked about this like slamming the door. This is the door frame. The trunk and the arm is going to be the door on its hinge opening, and then you're just slamming the door, okay? So in slamming the door, you can still get some extension back up into the chain, and this is going to give you a very high ROI on pitching velocity. There's a lot of correlation linking lead knee extension and deceleration of the hip and the front leg to ball velocity. There's probably a higher correlation to ball velocity from the front leg than there is from the back leg, okay? So your training focus should be isometric split squats, rotational resistance drills, plyometrics, especially focusing on the deceleration. What that can look like is like you could do something as simple as like do an ice skater off of the mound and then work on stopping yourself and landing on that front leg. And you can do that to variable levels of acceleration. You can add a band to get some more force hitting into the front leg, but it's just working on the deceleration of that front leg, okay? Medicine balls and water bags. Water bags are great for decel. Med balls, especially if you're using like a two-hand variation to where you have to stop, or using a water bag to where you have to stop, that really emphasizes the deceleration. So efficient leg block equals better trunk velocity plus reduced elbow torque. Okay, phase 5 is going to be the arm path and energy transfer. The energy roll, it converts your trunk rotation into linear velocity at release, okay? So the ROI rating on this is medium. It can possibly be higher if you have a bad arm action, and this is a point of emphasis that you really need to work on, okay? So the bottlenecks are going to be poor arm slot, timing, inefficiency, or arm strength, which is acceleration and deceleration of the arm, okay? So let's just talk briefly about arm path and the timing of it. Basically, if there's that early trunk rotation, that's going to have the arm forced to play catch up, all right? That's not going to be good for it. That's, again, talking more about where your torso is landing at the moment of front foot contact. That's going to kind of create some arm path issues. What we want to happen is some degree of horizontal abduction at front foot strike. So horizontal abduction of the shoulder, the shoulder pulling back this way, that's going to be linked to ball velocity. So not only being able to land shoulders closed with the trunk, but some degree of pullback into horizontal abduction, some degree of external rotation, like if this is 0 degrees and this is 90 degrees, somewhere in about 45 degrees is pretty good, okay? If you are super late, this can be problematic. So if you're landing at foot strike and this is late, what tends to happen is the shoulders are trying to rotate, the arm is trying to fight itself to get up and cocked on time, and there's not a smooth transfer of energy. What you ideally want is when the arm is horizontally abducted, the shoulders are closed, you're in about 45 degrees of external rotation. When you begin to rotate the trunk, okay, the arm is flipping up and then it can receive that energy transfer and go into layback and then become that final link of the catapult that launches into ball release, okay? So this can have a bigger effect for guys that have a really late arm action and need to work on better timing of it. This can be a bigger ball velocity jump. But for most guys who have good timing of the arm already, it's probably not going to be very big ROI. So your training focus needs to be biomechanical feedback, whether that's from motion capture or video feedback, plyometric drills with weighted balls. I think that's great for proprioception. Acceleration and deceleration training, i.e. arm strength. So this is where using dynamometers so you can know if the back of your shoulder is as strong as the front of your shoulder. There's been some research on IR and ER strength levels, how that correlates to ball velocity, okay? So the arm is very important. It becomes basically the funnel that releases the energy that you've built through the ground, the hips, the trunk, and then finally out to the arm. But it's not the main emphasis of your training in terms of ROI unless you have a very late arm action. Okay, next point. Okay, so this is the training ROI table going on from our highest of order of priority all the way down to the lowest, okay? And keep in mind that the ROI on the velocity, it's still just medium. Over here, we have how many miles per hour it can potentially add. So I would say trunk rotation, okay? So that angular acceleration of your trunk, very high. Early rotation, which is that glove side pulling open or lack of power, this could potentially add anywhere from 3 to 10 miles per hour. I think by far this is going to be the biggest ROI in terms of pitching velocity development. Trunk rotation power is highly correlated to ball velocity. For your ROI, the best bang for your buck, I'm definitely going trunk rotation. Number two, we've got the lead leg block, the force absorption, and the transfer. If you cannot decel, you are going to leak energy. Guys who get better at that front leg block, that can add anywhere to 3 to 5 miles per hour. Keep in mind, this is just, I'm just kind of making these numbers up of what my opinion of it. Some guys, you could probably even add more from just fixing the front leg, okay? Or any of these. Okay, so hip rotation and separation. Okay, the elastic storage and the timing, ROI on this is high. This is the limiting factor is going to just be poor sequencing. Okay, this can add a potential 3 to 5 miles per hour. Maybe some guys even more if you're really bad at sequencing. Timing your hip rotation and your separation. Okay, there's been Brittany Dowling's study on the open pelvis position, all kinds of studies looking at your trunk positioning and the timing of landing and separation at front foot strike, okay? This is very highly correlated to pitching velocity. I think you can make excellent gains in here. Arm path, the sequencing and the timing, the arm slot, the timing, the inefficiency. I would even add the arm strength. This can add 1 to 3 miles per hour. That is nothing to sneeze at. And then if you're a guy who has late arm path, this might potentially even add more velocity than the 1 to 3 miles per hour. That might bump it up for you if you're a late arm path guy. Okay, so back leg ground reaction force, the linear momentum. I'd say this is medium. It creates weak force in the back leg, poor stride length. You can get a plus 1 to 2 miles per hour. The reason I bumped this one down is because I think this has been kind of, especially over the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, we've really thought of just like the really hard drive off of the mound. I don't think it yields as big of a ROI return as what people are expecting. I think for certain guys, like we've talked about, the Tim Lincecums, the Spencer Striders, the Shane McClanahans, there are guys who are leveraging the back leg drive that can still time the hip rotation into front foot strike. It requires a ton of hip mobility. It requires a ton of leg strength and power. It does have variables that make your pitch metrics play up in terms of extension and IVB and VAA, and it can make your fastball better with perceived velocity. So there is benefit to the back leg ground reaction force and the linear momentum and the linear propulsion, but I wouldn't put it at the top of my list, okay? So, performance investment plan, prioritize trunk rotational power, enhance lead leg stiffness, optimize your hip to shoulder separation, develop lower body force production, and then refine your arm mechanics. And then train the hardest ROI segments first for compounding velocity growth. I really just kind of focus on depending on the guy and the individuality, but to some degree, you're probably going to be training a little bit of all of this in a good training program. All right, and then there are the references. Guys, I hope this video was very informative. If you guys haven't liked or subscribed, please do. These videos take a long time to put together, but I hope it brings you guys a lot of value, and stay tuned for the next one.